Welcome back. We're going to keep moving with the right of self-defense with Nate Cap and Dylan McCormick on the CubbyWhole Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
So, when you look at weapons, the nature of basically all things, weapons are included within this, is that they advance, they become more complex over time. And there is I guess it's a phrase that I really like, which is brace of pistols. A brace of pistols is basically a way of saying that you are carrying multiple pistols in a belt, generally. Because you have these weapons during this time period when the founders exist, they don't really contain multiple. They don't have cartridge technology. They're shooting these balls from like flintlock guns, and so what you want to be able to do with any weapon ideally is have it be as efficient as possible. So the nature of the efficiency of a brace of pistols is I am able to fire one and then immediately grab another. In terms of this notion of high-powered weaponry, well, perhaps some of the highest power weaponry of their day would have been galleons, like warships. And you have a letter that a citizen wrote, and I don't recall who it was to. I believe it was someone in their locality, but ultimately Thomas Jefferson winds up rendering his opinion on this thing. And his response is essentially, of course you are able to privately own a warship. It's almost like you didn't even read the Second Amendment. Like, yeah, you get to own arms. It's a general term. It's a catch-all term for weapons. And if we have this belief that, okay, the founders, well, there's no possible way that they could have seen weapons advance. They could not have foreseen that weapons would advance to the current state of complexity that they're at. Well, then why would agents of the state, should police be allowed to use modern weaponry then? Or should they also be equipped with muskets and flintlocks? Let's also remember that firearms technology advanced while the founders were still alive. Benjamin Franklin himself worked to increase the effective firing rate of weapons himself, and in many ways was working on technology that preceded reciprocating fire, lever action guns. So the nature of this thing is basically that anyone who has sat down and thought about it for even a moment would understand weapons and all things constantly evolve in terms of complexity. And to imply that the Second Amendment only includes muskets, it basically assumes a very high level of ignorance on the part of the people who constructed the document.
So you're saying that if the military has a tank, we should be able to have a tank?
Yes. Your ability to own a tank doesn't even necessarily mean that you ought to use a tank. And that's an idea that I think challenges a lot of people. There are people who do this with firearms, though. You own firearms. It doesn't mean that you're running around using them necessarily. I'm not advocating that people, I'm just gonna, take the tank on down to the grocery store to get some groceries. If we are accepting as a presupposition that what the Second Amendment gets at is that in order to have a free state, you can't limit the rights of the individual to keep and bear arms, and that the reason that you're doing this is because they might need to put the state they might have to check the state's power with this forceful capability, then it means that they're going to have to possess all the same tools as the state. And one of the things that is really unfortunate, and this kind of goes back to this notion of the Boogaloo, this Second Civil War, is when you make direct conflict impossible, what you ensure is that when there is conflict, it will be asymmetric in nature. And what I mean by asymmetric is it refers to this notion of asymmetric warfare. Let's take a look at what has been going on in the Middle East for decades. our military is apparently not capable of vesting a group of people who are decentralized in nature. They're using like Soviet era weaponry, and they're not concentrated in urban areas largely. They're out in the open, and we have really every technological advantage possible in terms of engaging groups like Al-Qaeda, groups like ISIS, and we can't oust them. We cannot stop them. And that's the nature of asymmetry. Our military is designed to fight another military. And so if we reach this point where a second civil war is happening, the people who are engaging in it are not going to be engaging with law enforcers directly, most likely. We're going to, unfortunately, see a lot of civilians caught in crossfire. And I don't want that. And I don't think anyone wants that. It's a horrible idea. It's a horrible thing to have to think about. But that is where we're headed, is basically that if conflict arises, it's going to catch up people in it that have nothing to do with it, really.
Shall not be infringed. What does that really mean to you?
So, I'd like to read the first version, the first proposal of the Second Amendment. This is how it was worded. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Semicolon. A well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country, colon, but no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person. This is the way that the Second Amendment was originally written. You'll notice the first part of it includes the shall not be infringed rather than it. So the wording as it exists in the Second Amendment now is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. There's a lot of anachronistic terminology in that. And if I could just, I've kind of gotten at this a bit before, if I could just give a modern wording of it, I think it will kind of answer the question the most effectively. An organized militia capable of operating in uniformity is necessary to ensure that a nation under government rule maintains freedom. Because of this, at the individual level, each person must be allowed to own and equip all weapons, and you can't attempt to limit this in any way. What is it to infringe? What does this word mean? It means to limit. And really, it gets at this idea, like, if you have a space, and I even start to really, like, walk towards it in such a way to trespass on the space, I'm infringing on it. Infringement is really, it's a very good catch-all term. It says that you can't limit this in any way, and it's such a clear part of the Second Amendment that I see a lot of people who, in spirit, I agree with them. You know, they consider themselves to be Second Amendment activists. They are pro-arms. They are pro-self-defense. You will see a lot of them simply use the phrase "shall not be infringed" because it is so clear. It is so obvious.
So, if you had one message that you feel would be the most important message to people right now while our rights are being taken away and we're just under constant threat of being completely enslaved and locked down, what would that be?
One, so I guess this is I have to answer it in multiple parts, I guess. One, if you are a person who is concerned about this, you should definitely, at a bare minimum, you should already own a weapon. You should already own guns. And if you don't, go and get one. I think it's really important to understand, you brought up the idea of a person owning a tank earlier. I think it's really important to understand that the Second Amendment isn't about guns. The Second Amendment uses the term arms. This ranges from everything to being a sharpened stick and even tanks, ICBMs, nuclear weapons. I don't want. First of all, the idea that like, oh, well, if you were able to own a nuclear weapon legally, every person would have it. Every person doesn't own a gun. Cars are extremely common. Not every person owns a car, but I don't want to digress and get away from the point. One of the most important things that you can do goes back to one of the things I brought up earlier, which is culture. Establishing a strong and positive culture around gun ownership. People need to, one, be steadfast in this fight. And it is a fight that is not necessarily physical yet. It is a cultural battle where one of the worst long-term things that I see happening is not even necessarily that the state is enacting laws, but that the culture around guns is shifting towards making it unpopular or undesirable for someone to own weapons. It is social shaming and ridicule and humiliation that is preventing some people from being open about this thing, from maybe arguing with people, from taking a stand ideologically, verbally. And if you are a person who you are centered, you are acting in right action, you are a morally good person, and someone is trying to deprive you of your rights, yes, maybe you do need to be prepared for this notion of using force to defend yourself. In the ideal world, this is not a thing that we would need to be concerned about, but let me make this as low resolution as possible. Would we be happy today to learn that people who were Jewish in Nazi Germany, that they defended themselves from the Gestapo arriving at their homes with firearms? Would we be happy to learn that people of Russia, when the NKVD came to take them to gulags, that they killed the members of the NKVD? I think we would be happy about that. That would be a thing that people thought was justifiable. Again, we culturally in the U.S., it is thought of as favorable that slaves would rise up and eliminate their masters to free themselves because it is the right thing to have been done. So to the extent that you are going to live in a world, live in a place where law enforcement are going to come and use violence to take your gun because it holds 11 rounds. It's the magic number is 10. You can't have that. Or, well, you were red flagged because you said something that was questionable on the internet. You posted this meme. You made a joke, and you're not allowed to say that and own guns at the same time. You get a lot of people that will tell you that, just cooperate with the law and, fight it in court. This is an ugly thing for me to have to say, and I hate that I have to say it, but maybe fighting on your lawn is going to be a better solution than fighting in court. And every moment that people don't take a stand, you are losing ground. We are losing ground rapidly. And the very nature of arguing about the Second Amendment, and the reason that I choose to use the term natural right to self-defense, is because the Second Amendment and being pro-2A, being pro-gun, automatically limits you in your capacity to argue for this thing. When you are pro-Second Amendment, what you're advocating for is a civil right, not a natural right. Too many people lack the understanding that the Second Amendment is recognition of natural law. I get my rights from a piece of paper? No, I get my rights from my ability to be a rational agent and my ability, or rather the fact that I am born of nature, born of God. Some people they cringe at that term. But you are capable of doing this thing, of owning this thing without affecting any other being. And you ought not be limited if it doesn't affect another person. The Hegelian dialectic that exists around this debate is really scary. And when your bedfellows are people like the NRA, you're in a position where they are almost worse than the enemies, because I can rely on someone who is absolutely anti-self-defense, is what I would say, or maybe even just anti-gun. I can rely on them to act consistently. The NRA do this very deceptive thing of pretending, well, we're on your side, we're the National Rifle Association, and you see, we're here to defend your rights. Well, the NRA has supported every major instance of gun control since their inception. And so they work almost as really as a double agent. They're selling you down the river. And when you say, I'm pro-gun, what you have done is you have already lost this argument of understanding that it's about weapons. It's about the ability to arm yourself. It's about the ability to be equal in your capabilities of projective force with the people who are ruling over you. So to sum that up a little more concisely, the things that I think are the most important are being educated about this properly, being morally resolute, being trained and capable of bearing and equipping and using firearms or whatever weapon you have, and if necessary, taking a stand defensively, defending yourself, using your natural right to self-defense.
Well said. Something you said a little bit earlier was you were talking about Nazi Germany and Russia. Why is it that people tend to not regard the fact that history repeats itself and that the same tactics that are being used today were used back then?
I think that people have this idea that, well, that happened there. It can never happen here. It wouldn't happen here. We are the people who defeated the Nazis. There's no way that we would ever be similar to them. But the very nature of government, I would say, is that it's basically about shades of gray. It stops being absolute. As soon as you introduce the state, you are basically inviting this thing in that is, the state is just monopoly on the initiation of force. And then that monopoly on the initiation of force is used to secure the other things, the other functions that the state might perform. And I have this phrase that I like to use, and I have found that I am using it more frequently, which is the diminishing returns of tyranny. And what I mean when I say this is that when you use violence to enforce a thing, intergenerationally, what happens is the understanding of the rule or law which is being enforced through violence is lost. So at the outset of a culture, if in the first generation you have, maybe for example, you have everyone in this place understands natural law to a really high extent, but they decide that for the next generation of people, the way that they're going to police them is that they're going to use violence. Anytime this new incoming generation, anytime they do something that is not in keeping with natural law, we simply go to violence. We don't really educate them thoroughly on the underlying principles, why you ought to do these things. We don't introduce them to the deontological nature of the way natural law functions. We just say, do this thing or else. It's punitive. Well, what happens over time is you hemorrhage the full understanding of why you ought to act this way. Instead, it's well, I better do this or else. And what that means is the incoming generation of law enforcers are also just going to understand how to apply violence. And you slowly it slowly vaunts itself towards being exclusively about violence and punitive measure.
So does that mean that if people are for gun control, are they essentially responsible for the violence that comes down on those who own firearms?
I would say yes. If you support a thing, but you don't do it yourself, to what degree are you responsible for it? Obviously, the person who is actually doing the thing with their own hands, with their physical body, bears the greatest form of responsibility. But if I tell you that you go assassinate this person, go kill them, and you perform the actual murder, of course, you're a murderer. But I'm, at the very least, a murderer by proxy. I commanded you to do this thing. And so when you have people who, first of all, I think it's really funny, the terminology used, gun control, that people are for gun control. People are, I perhaps shouldn't use the term anti-gun, because people who are gun control advocates aren't really anti-gun. They are more specifically for gun control. They're really advocating for consecration of force to the state entirely. Because how are we going to enforce disarmament? We're going to use agents of the state, and they're going to be armed with weapons. The irony, of course, is that a lot of the people who seem to be in favor of gun control also have issues with police. They think that the police are these unintelligent, racist thugs, and I wouldn't disagree with them, that know nothing but how to use violence. This is just an instance of violence that they're fine with. We're fine with seeing violence enacted on this portion of people because we disagree with them. They have a thing we don't like. They believe a thing we don't like. So, yes, you bear responsibility if you are willing this through legislature, through voting. You have culpability, I think.
Very well said. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we get off here?
I do really want to stress this idea that I think that culture is a better avenue for creating change than politics is. I understand that people want to operate in the political arena. I do think that there is value in being able to use the systems in place to try to undermine the systems in place, if that makes sense. People doing these protests and these rallies, I do think it has an effect. And the visibility is also one that feeds into culture. But really, what we need to do is normalize firearms. And this applies to more than just firearms. We need to normalize this notion of self-defense. And there's a lot of different avenues that people can do that, from talking to people. And I get that talking to people is not necessarily what you want to do, because it can be frustrating to talk to someone who disagrees with you. But if that is the case, that you are frustrated by this, invest that time in people who mean something to you. Invest that time in people who you're close to that you disagree with. Do things at the personal level first. Don't spend your time arguing with someone on Facebook that is, one, probably going to ignore what you write, and two, is probably, maybe, they are getting off even on this ability to make you angry. Act at the personal level. Talk with people who you care about and have disagreement with. Take people shooting. Really. Convince someone to go shooting. I've had multiple people in my life, from my mother to close friends, who were vehemently anti-gun, anti-self-defense. And being able to take this person out and show them how a firearm works and have them shoot the firearm, it demystifies it. It helps them to stop being scared of this thing that they don't have understanding of. And often fear comes from not understanding this thing. As I said earlier, a lot of people are scared of firearms because they don't understand them. If you can demystify the way this thing functions for people, they will automatically feel more comfortable around it. And when I say normalization, that's what you're doing. You're making people feel more comfortable about this thing.
Yeah, I've noticed that really helps in my life too. Well, I'm really thankful that you've done the work that you've done to be able to share this type of information. And, I think a lot of people will benefit from this if you're listening. So that's pretty much all the time we have today, guys. So we hope that this show has been valuable, and you can find more shows, news, and videos at CubbyWhole.com. That's CubbyWhole.com. Thank you, and have a great day. Thanks, Dylan.
Yeah, so I'm sure you could see why that was one of my favorite episodes. I mean, Dylan and Nate just hit everything right on the head, and Nate is such an awesome host and he's asking the proper questions. He's asking all the correct questions that he needs to be asking. A lot of the rhetoric that I've heard from anti-gun people, they've hit on all those topics. Why do you want to own a gun? Why do you want to be like John Wick and blah blah blah. And I also think it's really great that he added in, people take somebody shooting with you. That's what normalizes it, and it really does demystify it. I love everything that they had to say about this topic. Oh, I was trying to get through. There's like a boss that hides out in a cave over here. I was trying to get to that, but maybe it'll be on next time. Yeah, so check out the Cubbyhole. Another amazing episode, one of my favorites. And actually, this is the episode that encouraged me to get a gun. We got the stimulus check, and I told Jasmine, I was like, if we get another stimulus check, I'm gonna go get a gun. And we got a Ruger Mark IV, and it's absolutely fucking gorgeous. It's so gorgeous. Oh my god. Oh well. I don't think YouTube's gonna like this episode anyway. But oh, there's one of the bosses. All right. Stick around. We're probably going to get into some Call of Cthulhu here tonight because it's spooky season. So, like the Lillingtons say, please stay tuned. And hope you enjoyed this episode. Backtree and Woods. Okay, that's where I got to start out next time. At Backtree and Woods at the Amdo region. We got to get to this boss. All right. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Please support the Cubbyhole. Nate Cap and Brandon Martin, both of the hosts of Cubbyhole, are on the One Great Work Network, and I will put a link of the One Great Work Network in the description of this video because they are absolute legends. We already interviewed Brandon once. Hopefully, we would love to interview him a couple more times. You know how we do it. We like to do our interviews in person. We don't like to do over the internet. And hopefully, yeah, we'd love to interview Nate Cap as well. And Dylan. Dylan's also a legend. All these guys are legends. Listen to their work. Pay attention. Spend some time. Pay attention. All right. I'm out of here.